Hi, everyone. So excited to be here. My name's Tatiana. I am the host and founder of Bedside, which is a podcast series all about sex and relationships and really kind of debunking the narratives around intimacy and pleasure and how to really live a life filled with joy and connection. And I got started in this space in kind of a weaving and winding way, the same way I feel like a lot of people in the sexual wellness and sexual education space get started. I think it's funny because it's like you don't just come out of the world being like, I want to talk about sex and work in sex education. Well, I mean, I guess some people do, but my journey here was kind of interesting. I guess I'm trying to think, I'm like, should I go for the long story? I'll go for kind of like a middle ground. So I come from a world of design and branding and brand strategy. And that's kind of where I started my career in advertising and kind of helping early startup brands make their way into the space. So I think I've always kind of had this really like entrepreneurial knack to me. And I love brand design. And I just grew up in a hyper creative household. My mom is like the ultimate creative. She's a painter. She's kind of a jack of all trades. And she really encouraged all of her kids to be really creative and kind of see the world through that lens. So when I kind of got started in the branding space, I saw this really sweet spot of bringing to life ideas that I really believed in, but being able to help them flourish in really an artistic and beautiful lens, right? And so I started out in the advertising space. I was kind of helping early days with Milk Makeup as they launched into the beauty category. So it was really fun. And I lived in New York, and I got really close with my team at Milk, and there used to be an editorial channel there. And I pitched to the editorial director. I said, hey, I actually have this really interesting idea for an interview series, and I'm wondering if you guys would be interested in having me spearhead it. Just give me a chance. I have a really cool idea. And I was inspired kind of, this was like when Glossier was ruling the world. And I was inspired by their blog called Into the Gloss, where they would interview Emily Weiss, the founder of Glossier, would sit down in kind of influencers' bedrooms and bathrooms and chat with them about their skincare routines. And she'd ask them, she'd be like, tell me, like, do you get work done? You know, if it's a safe space to tell me if you get Botox, you know? And she was like kind of getting the beauty questions that and answers that everybody really wanted. And she was getting much more to the heart of people's skincare routines. And I was like, I love this series, but what if we could have this around sex and relationships? Because I felt like I was really missing that dialogue. And I could have it kind of amongst close friends with like glasses of wine, but I felt like the conversation was falling really short. And so I pitched this series called Bedside to the editorial team at Milk. And I said, hey, I'm going to just go to people's bedrooms across New York City. I'm going to sit with them at their bedsides, and I'm going to ask them questions they've never been asked about their sex lives, their routines, products that they use, and, you know, romance, love, dating, everything. And this series kicked off. It was their most read and engaged with series on their editorial channel. And this was right at the brink of when podcasting was kind of becoming a thing. And my editor was like, hey, you know, this is so exciting to see pop off on Milk's editorial channel, but have you ever thought of doing podcasts? And I was like, what? A podcast? Like, what the heck is that? I like, don't like the dudes at NPR just do podcasts? Like, what? I had never like really seen it for myself. And this is kind of, I feel like now it's become so much more normalized to be like, Amazon a mic, get started, do the thing. But at the time I was like, how do I do this? And she was like, order this mic here, and I think you should get started. So that is where I kind of started this interview series around sex and relationships. And it's kind of taken off since then. And it's been so incredible to connect with founders in the space and just have such profound dialogue around this, because I think ultimately, to kind of tie this in a bow here, the biggest thing that I've really seen around sex and sexuality and the narratives that I grew up with were really around like Cosmo and how to give the best blowjob.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
oh, like
Yeah.
this is falling so short, and like it doesn't feel like it's speaking to this contemporary person, this modern lover and dater and human being, and it feels so robotic. So I was like, there's a lot of white space here kind of between these hyperclinical narratives and these overly sexual narratives. I was like, we need a little bit more of a human dialogue around this. So that's kind of the story of how I got to where I am.
Yeah. And, it's so interesting to think about the Cosmo angle because, I did it. I learned from Cosmo how to give blowjobs, but then you think about it, it's like I was searching how to give good blowjobs. I wasn't even thinking about anything about myself and my body and my needs. I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah.
And so, like, as I age, like discovering more of that, it's like you don't even think about the Cosmos stuff and you have to do your own research. And so it's just so nice to have a platform for such an expansive way of thinking about sex.
Yes.
It's we all can relate to it and it's so needed. And there's so much reworking that I feel like needs to be done. And I
Yes.
do feel like a change is happening, which is very exciting. And this is why it's so wonderful to be at the brink of this like sexual revolution again.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's
Yeah.
so exciting. And I think like when I look at the resources that you and I had during our coming of age, like I was on Tumblr,
Mm.
and I was like on these kind of deep internet holes, and I felt like there wasn't actually a destination I could go to have a normalized, healthy, and realistic conversation about sex. It always felt like I had to dig deep in the internet.
Yeah.
And yeah, I totally agree with you. I felt like I was just always reading advice around how I could be a better giver in terms of
Yeah.
sexuality. And I never really ever was taught how to step into that myself. And I think it was when I went to college that I always say I had this like naive awakening, being like,
Mhm.
oh, no one here knows how to date and how to have sex, and
Yeah.
let alone how to do that almost consensually. So it was, yeah, it's a lot of really deep rooted narratives that I think we're all finally untangling, and
Yeah.
finally there are platforms that are giving it light in that contemporary
Yeah.
digestible way.
Yeah. And the amount of unlearning, and it's like until so many of us had to learn the hard way. And we
Yeah.
just don't have to learn the hard way if we're given the information off the bat as we're aging and we're growing and we're learning about ourselves. We don't have to settle for less. We can know our bodies better. And so it feels like in my sex ed program, my mentor kept saying like this is revolutionary work and that's why you have to keep doing it, like no matter what, it's going to be revolutionary work because people, it's still taboo, it's still a taboo subject even though we all do it and we all can relate to it and we all have bodies.
Yes. Agreed.
So what does sexual wellness mean to you and how do you cultivate it?
Ooh, love this question. Um, Sexual wellness to me is really not a specific category of wellness that is siloed to me. To me, sexual wellness is the concept that our well being also embraces our sexuality, and
Mm-hmm.
it also embraces our sexual expression. And I think for so long, the wellness category has ignored that, or we've like breezed by it, or not taken into account that our sexuality is a part of our overall well-being. And I think it's just been ignored for so long. So to me, it's almost like putting the emphasis of your sexual expression back into our greater understanding of our well-being. It's so important. It is what allows us to be that thriving, authentic, and alive part of ourselves outside of the bedroom. And I think like it's so interesting because when people think of it, they're like, okay, well, I guess this all has to do with how I am in a sexual experience or intimately. And I'm like, yes, but it's also a huge part of how you just thrive, right? So it means, that's what it means to me. And I think when it comes to cultivating it, I really look at it as like sexual wellness as our pleasure, like our pleasure, our well-being around our pleasure. And I think the best way to go about cultivating that is to prioritize it. And our world is not in agreement with that narrative. Our 9 to 5 sort of patriarchal dynamic totally doesn't kind of center that. But I think my approach to sexual wellness and what I constantly try to share with people is how radical it is to center that as your main priority. And when you can do that, like the things that you can begin to unravel in your own life and like community around you are just mind blowing.
Yeah, it's so true. I remember because I kept preaching like I have like a happiness list next to my desk as like a go-to to be like, I'm feeling weird. Like what is on
Right.
here?
Yeah.
And because before it was so simple, it was like, I'm feeling weird, I'm going to go on a hike. But then I was like, there's so much more pleasurable things than just that. I mean, yes, that's absolutely wonderful. And that does mileage for me, but there's so much more. And it's all the same feeling. It just is in a different activity.
Yeah.
I was feeling in a funk, and my sister was like, I don't think you're prioritizing, just like you said, your pleasure enough. So maybe you should be like making time to do the things that you love instead of like overbooking yourself in other ways. And I was like, that is so it. Like,
Yeah.
I have not been feeding myself to be able to like give to my partner, to be able to give to myself, to be able to just feel even and good and uplifted. And, you know, when people think of sexual wellness, I think so many times people like go back to Gwyneth Paltrow and the yoni egg on
Yeah.
Goop. And that's like where it started. And I think that's the most exciting thing about leading this work is you expose people to realize it's more than just what happens in the bedroom. It's more than just a toy. Even though, you know, you hear of someone who doesn't have a toy and you're like, you should get one because you don't even know. And sometimes I just sit there and I think to myself, there's so much in this world that I've never experienced that I don't even know. Like bringing it back to toys, I'm like, there are millions of toys and I love this toy. This is my favorite toy, but it's like, is this actually my favorite toy? Because there's so many I don't know about.
So
I
many.
think that's kind of the exciting thing about sexuality is like when you open yourself up to that, to the curiosity to explore it, then that is really what wellness is, and moving it beyond sexual desire and horniness and
Yes.
orgasms.
Yeah, and it's so crazy how like I'm continually surprised how like not only limited our ideology around sexual wellness is, but even our vocabulary. And I'm like, oh, it's just been so narrowed down by like a specific kind of group of people, honestly. And it's like kind of whittled it away to this bare minimum of what we've been taught what it encompasses. And it's like, you know, like let's bring back all these amazing pieces to it. I think I like one time made some graphic around like the hierarchy of sexual wellness, and I was inspired by like Maslow's like hierarchy of like needs, basic needs. And it was really interesting because like at the way top, which was like kind of the least important, was like toys and candles and like wellness products, and the bottom kind of comes down to this fundamental pillar of like, you know, your pleasure and your like ability to access play and to center that. And like really then it kind of builds up, and it's almost like this like cherry on top that's a sex toy, right? Like it's like this will enhance it, but it's so much more deeply rooted, you know.
True. And a toy doesn't do anything if you're not feeding all the other stuff.
Yes.
It's just a toy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I like you could link it right to people who do struggle to orgasm with anorgasmia. Like I'm like, you using this toy is not going to help. It's not getting to the root of those bigger problems that are maybe making you this way or have led to this. So yeah.
So how does community play into sexual wellness?
Oh my gosh. Community is everything. You know, like I think like when I think fundamentally, community is a huge pillar of who we are, just like as human beings, right? Like we are of a tribe mentality. We thrive with people around us to be amazing mirrors into who we are. So when you surround yourself with people who feel fucking good,
Mhm.
and you guys are mirroring to one another just how amazing you each are, like that is really when I feel like things start to click. And I just kind of like a personal story here. I probably in the past like 2 years have really intentionally taken stock into who my community is,
Mhm.
who is deserving of being in my community and where I am deserving of being in someone else's community. And, you know, I kind of had this big unraveling and unlearning around um, kind of friendships and connection and relationships, and realizing that not more, like more is not always the best mentality to go around when we are thinking of community. And I know that we have all been through a pandemic. We know what it's like to be isolated. And we know what it's like to also need community. And I think that, you know, when we're able to surround ourselves with people that make us like almost feel that like hell yes inside of us, that's really when we
Mhm.
kind of can also step into our own power as well. So I say all this to be like, you know, if there are people in your life that you're like, my light is getting dimmed, or I'm constantly getting shut down, or this just isn't feeling good anymore, there's room to negotiate that. And there's permission around that to like grow and change. And I think someone once told me, graduate out of communities that no longer serve you. So I think, you know, it's so important to kind of keep that tidy, keep
Yeah.
it clean, continually check in and kind of like do your housekeeping,
Yeah.
because it is directly reflected of how you thrive and how the people you love in your life thrive. So it's kind of this great mutual flow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like when you're doing that housekeeping, like sometimes it feels sticky and sometimes it feels hard. And
Oh yeah.
you're realizing something's going to have to change. And that change is always uncomfortable, but it doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah.
So I think people oftentimes get deterred from the housekeeping because it is hard and it
Yeah.
feels uncomfortable, but almost all the time, change is a positive thing.
Mm.
So, oh,
Yeah.
not all the time, but almost all the time. I'm like, global warming, not great. However, friendship.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And I think like, you know, I think a lot of people are like, well, you know, I've been in relationship with someone for, and you'll look at kind of your history, being kind of the length of how long you've known someone, and really thinking that you owe something because of maybe a time frame. And you really don't.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay. And I wish more people spoke about that, because you know, as someone who's really fucking walked through the fire around it, like gone to hell and back around that, and
Yeah.
sat in really, really intense feelings and just worked through it, and knew at the other side, hopefully there was going to be something good. Like I can tell you right now that the aliveness and just sheer like joy you'll feel on the other side, because
Yeah.
you're really, really learning more about who you are too, is
Yeah.
like there's nothing like it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
To that point, like I thoroughly believe like attracts like. So when you're like in your ultimate pleasure centered, like you're gonna meet people who are reflecting the same thing. And I think like when friendships change, it's because like is not attracting, like you're not like
Yeah.
each other anymore. And so it feels really uncomfortable. And maybe at one point you were, but now things have changed. And it's like we almost have to just really respect that, because if we want to be in our total well-being, it's we have to accept that we've changed, and there's other things that are like us that will come towards us when we open it. And
Yes.
I always say that when people are struggling with community and building community, I'm like, you're feeling friction because you're not getting your like mirrored back to you. And that's why you feel disappointed. But if you just keep being yourself, you're going to meet people who are just like magnetically connected to you, and it's going to feel like you've known them forever. And
Yeah.
that's like the really cool thing about building community. And like, something like, I'm sure like Bedside has like core values that people are attracted to. So naturally, people who are interested in this podcast, even My Favorite Murder, you meet someone else who listens to My Favorite Murder and you're like, yes, like we are there somewhere. And then it's like the same thing with the sexual wellness and Bedside. It's the community that gets built around something. And I think that's why it's so awesome to have an idea and to think about something and build it. And I was going to say They Will Come, and I was like in supervision yesterday and she had quoted that movie, and I was like, it's funny, like Field of Dreams, she kept saying that to us. You build the sexual wellness and you build your offerings and you build yourself and people will come to you. You just have to keep building.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, community does come when you build it, build it for someone.
Yes. And honestly, I think it's like when you build it for yourself.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, and I have a few things to say around this where it's like, first off, like you don't need to like go leave a whole, like if someone is no longer aligned with you or like you've been friends with someone for a while, it's not like you have to ditch them in the corner. It's just sometimes you have to renegotiate. Oh, maybe like I'm choosing to see them a little less, right? Like there's balance here. But I think, building and creating community takes time, and you have to be comfortable with the fact that it's not going to come overnight. And I always remind myself, whether it's I'm making friends, whether it's growth in business, like good things take time. I don't want the overnight like success. I want the steady, consistent, rich as fuck growth. Like that shit takes time. And so like, even when it comes to like making friends or like going on dates and trying to find a partner, right? Like be okay with fucking being alone with yourself. Like be okay with maybe you're having a period of time where you have more acquaintances than you do best friends, right? And I think it's like leaning into that and like allowing yourself to be a beginner again, and allowing yourself to stumble, and allowing yourself to like get on Reels or TikTok, even though you don't fucking know what you're doing, but you're going to do it anyways, and just test and try. And I think it's like that continuous dedication to yourself and to your community, and like in you doing that, you're giving other people permission to do that too. Like, look, I know I didn't say that right, or like I looked kind of funny, or like I'm still trying to figure this out, but like permission to do the same. That
is such good advice. So it like applies to everything.
It
like,
really
reminder, be patient and keep going.
Keep going. Like good things take time. Like I mean, good for the 1 in a million who had an overnight success and figured it out. But I see time and time again, like people be like getting things that they want overnight and they don't even know what to do with it. Right. And they just flop. Because they're like, I don't know what to do with all this that suddenly just came my way. So slow and steady, people. And I personally always live by that motto because I've always been kind of a late bloomer. And maybe it's because I'm a little bit more of like, I'm going to sit back and observe and then kind of figure out where I fit into this puzzle. But it's a good way of being. If you're the same way, it's a good way of being.
Yes, definitely. As a creative person, how does this play into your brand and your podcast and your sex life?
Yes. Ooh. Creativity is everything to me. It lights me up like nothing other. My world would be really silent, I think, if I wasn't creative. I just see creativity, when it comes to Bedside. I think for me, when I started in the sexual education space and wellness space, I wasn't really seeing a lot of design in that category the way that I wanted to have it live. And
Mhm.
so I think there was a lot of white space around like, oh, like there's a lot of room to really use my skills as a brand designer and bring this into the category. Like, let's rebrand sex.
Yeah.
So I think like that's kind of how creativity has influenced really like the corner I've carved out with Bedside. But I think when it comes to my own sexuality and sex life, I think I use the concepts of creativity to get into my flow
Mm.
and to you know, I'm going to use some design language here, but when you're in advertising per se, you'll get a brief from a client, which is like going to outline an objective.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like loose confines of what their design ask is.
Mhm.
And I think a brief is really important because it helps set a framework, but there's a lot of fluidity within that. And I kind of look at that similarly to how I enjoy
Mhm.
my own sexuality and sex life and pleasure in this kind of like hyper masculine do world,
Uh-huh.
where I actually can utilize that framework and fill in that space, that blank space that I find with that creativity and that flow. So it's not like this uncontained thing. It's like, okay, within this system, how can I work with my creativity to like help me explore and like lean into my sensuality? So I think that it's kind of influenced my lifestyle a bit, right? Where I'm like, oh, okay, I see the systems that are at hand, but also like what are ways that I can kind of add my more of my creative flow into it.
Mhm. Mhm. I think that's the cool thing about creativity is that it's it's problem solving, but it's also expression.
Yeah.
So two things at once that like I'm a type A creative, which is like sometimes those don't go together, but that's who I am.
Are your
And
files really organized?
yeah, they could be better organized.
Okay.
but, but in other ways, I'm like super efficient and I like when you posted that when you had that podcast episode about
The
um
grid.
your calendar, I was
Oh,
like, I already do that. And it's like so effective. And I actually, after listening to that episode, I reorganized it a little bit and I made the colors like more intentional. And I was like, this is
yay!
even better.
Yes.
So it's nice. It's like even 10 minutes of meditation is like penciled in there. And it's just, it is really great on top of like my work schedule.
It's so
Um,
exciting. For those who don't know what Lizzie and I are talking about, we can have her link the episode.
yeah.
I think like how to build a pleasure practice. It was one of my podcast episodes, and it's really about like how you can use this kind of like 9 to 5 system that we have no choice. Like we are in this 9 to 5 system. You know, most of us are, but it's like how can we utilize that construct but still fit in our pleasure
Yeah.
where we see fit and kind of like carve out and prioritize our time. And yeah, it's an absolute game changer, especially for like if you are kind of a hyper visual
Uh-huh.
and using like the
It is.
color systems and the blocks. It's very
Yeah. It's really
very
nice. It's really nice. And also, I want to comment on the fact that so many people don't think they're creative, but literally everyone is creative.
yes.
And I
Yeah.
think that's an important thing to remember. Just because you can't draw, just because you're not a designer, doesn't mean you're not creative. So I think that's also the thing about the pleasure practice is it is creative and it helps like nurture your creativity, which is just an enriching experience altogether.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it like taps into like what makes you feel, you know, it's like your pleasure practice is going to look so different than mine, than the person next to me. And like, I
Yeah.
think that is what is so exciting about it is that it's like what lights you up, like, and what lights you up is inherently creative. Like,
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
exciting.
How do you think people can bring more creativity or cultivate more creativity in their sex lives and sexuality?
I think it's first just recognizing that, like we were just saying, like you already are a creative being. And to me, it's more about allowing yourself space to play. And I love this concept of play because I think so often we become a certain age and suddenly we're not allowed to play anymore. Like kids have free reign of playing, but suddenly you're 13 or whatever age, and you suddenly are like, it's not cool to play anymore, And I think that like that is really where all of us are most creative. And it's whether, you physically are, we're a kid who loved to scatter out art supplies and just go for it, or you were someone who used your imagination a lot, or you were someone who's really loved playing sports and getting outside and playing around. And I think like play is creativity.
Yeah.
And when we can tap into that and allow ourselves to get playful, it's so much fun. And I've said this on the podcast a couple of times. I'm sure you know this, what's coming, but I think the best way for people to revisit that or wonder what to start with is look back at what lit you up when you were a kid. Like, what were those innocent, mindless, but so fulfilling ways that you played? And like, how can you translate that into your adult life? And I think adult play is always looked at as sex. But it's like, and that is so important for our happiness and well-being too. But I think it's like, let's broaden that definition for us as well. Like, how can we go play? And kind of going back to my mom is such an inspiration for me growing up. Like she always said it would, like the weekend would come, it would be Saturday morning, and she would be like, her phrase is always, let's play. Like, how do we want to play? And it would be like, the weekend is open. What does everybody want to do? And so like she still says it to this day. Like I'll give her a call. She's like, your father and I are playing. And
that's awesome.
It's like so great to see that. And I think like that was always such a great model for me. But yes, I think kind of the best way to do that is really to look back at what lit you up when you were younger. And get started. Even for me, something really tangible. I grew up playing tennis kind of in a recreational way, hadn't touched a tennis racket in like 15 years. And then I had this kind of ping a couple of months ago to be like, you should look into some tennis clinics. Like you really liked getting outside and having fun and meeting people. And it was also part of my initiative to like get to know community too. And this new area that I moved to. And so now it's like one of the best parts of my week is when I get to go and play tennis, and it's just it's adults having the best time.
And when you're doing that stuff, like you feel the most yourself. Like my equivalent is dancing, like just being silly dancing. It's like my entire life through line of like, this is how I shine my personality is through like movement of this nature. And it's just so pure. Like it does make you feel young again, but it also makes you feel like you've always been this person.
Yes. That's such a great point. I love that. Like you just feel so yourself. You feel so yourself. And it feels so natural and like, it's there's something so innocent and alive about it because you're like tapping back into that kind of absolutely free-spirited part of you that is so innate, but it's kind of been a little bit conditioned out of us for a whole slew of reasons.
It's unfortunate, but it's not really a problem unless you make it a problem. So
yes, exactly. Like when you can refocus it and take it back into your hands, that's when you just like feel like you're no longer on autopilot in any way.
And it's no one's fault. It's society makes us believe certain things about certain parts of our life, certain ages in our life. And all we got to do is just take control because we're the only ones that really have the control. It's not too late.
It's never too late.
Never. It's true. So after immersing yourself in like the sexuality field and this work, what is one of the biggest things that you've learned about yourself?
I think the biggest thing that I've learned about myself is that I have permission to step into my power. I and like we all have permission to step into our power. And I think I'm going to speak mostly to those who were kind of raised in like a very patriarchal dynamic, and like many of us who were raised female bodied, we've been told so long to not step into that, or to be so like timid around stepping into our power. And I think that when we do, and when we find our ability to do so, it just shifts your life. And I would say, since working in this space, I have learned a lot about power dynamics. I've learned a lot about the power that sexuality and our sexual expression has. I've learned a lot about the power of pleasure. And I think through that, I've learned to step into my power more and more. And like, it's an ever continuing thing. It's not like one day I stepped into it and there I am. Like, I think I'm still doing so. What a cool experience to give yourself, to like really step into all that you are capable of.
Yeah.
And I think that there was a moment in time where I felt like I had like a capability cap, where I was like, I can't go further than this without people judging me, or without me being hard on myself, or whatever that narrative was. I almost was like, I'm capped here. But you know, I think all of us are here to fulfill a purpose and to live your most beautiful life that you can. And you have the power to do so.
Yeah.
And what an exciting thing, right? And I hope to never feel like I arrived. Like, I hope to just continually be like, I will step into this and, you know, see what's next and what's next and what's next.
Yeah.
But also not in a sense of like, you know, never being content, more just like being really in my like flow and my purpose.
Yeah. Enjoying the journey.
Exactly. And not limiting it in any way either.
Yeah. And I think so many of us like assign extra meaning to so many steps along the way in the journey. And it's just like society actually telling us what to assign steps in the journey. But when you realize that, to your point, when you're in your own power, society is nothing. Society's opinions are nothing when you are in your own power. And it is life-changing, like you said.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I even had like an aha moment about it the other day, where there was an instance where I saw someone who's like pretty prominent in media, and for a while, I think subconsciously, I was a little envious of them. I was like, oh, like they're really crushing it. And, you know, I wish I could be at that level of whatever. And I had this moment where I was like, you know what? That I was gifted this right now, this kind of moment of reflection, as a reminder that I actually have that exact same power.
Right.
And like, what I'm envious about is actually what I admire the hell out of this person for. Yes. And I almost saw it as this complete, like, you have permission to do the same and fucking go for it. Like step into those shoes because you're ready. And yeah.
I honestly think so many times jealousy is actually inspiration. And when you reframe it to anything, like any jealous feelings coming up, to be like, oh, they have something I want. It's like, you can have it too. And you see them having it, and it's inspiration to you to like go in that direction. And it doesn't have to be a negative feeling. And I think when we twist it like that, again, we're like feeding the power back into ourselves, which it helps you keep going.
Yeah. And I mean, I look at people who, if you feel envy toward a person, that person is your biggest expander.
Mm.
That person is like your biggest, like role model to maybe take into consideration. They have a certain element of their aura that you are just, that you see in yourself. They are a mirror, back to this mirroring conversation, right?
Yeah.
And so like take that as a golden nugget, and almost bless it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Thank you so much. I really just adored this conversation. I love talking to you. I love listening to your podcast every week. I love following you on Instagram. It's all just good. And everyone else should follow along as well.
Thank you,
Um,
Rizky.
yeah. And I hope to speak soon.
Yeah, of course. Yes, please keep me posted on all things happening. And yeah, it was such a treat to be here. Definitely, anyone tuning in, go ahead to the Bedside podcast, wherever podcasts are found, to go listen to episodes around sex, relationships, ghosting, friend breakups, whatever. We talk about it all. And you can find me at the Bedside on Instagram and by the Bedside on TikTok.
Hell yeah. Go right now. Go follow. They will. I know they will.